Good evening, visitors, and welcome to the Australian War Memorial's Last Post ceremony. My name is Jared Pratt, and joining us today from the Royal Australian Navy is Leading Seaman Mitchell Rodway. 80 years ago today, on the 19th of November 1941, HMAS Sydney was lost with all hands following a close quarters engagement with the German raider HSK Cormoran. Sydney had been celebrated for her successful battles in the Mediterranean, where she famously sank the Italian cruiser, the Bartolomeo Colleoni. Returning to Australia in February 1941, Sydney and her crew received a hero's welcome. On completion of a brief period at home that included a change of command, Sydney was tasked with escorting troop ships to Southeast Asia via an Indian Ocean route along the coast of Western Australia. It was during the return passage of one of these taskings that Sydney encountered the Cormoran. Disguised as a Dutch merchant vessel, Cormoran used the deception to gain an advantage by closing the range between the two ships, which allowed her to bring all her armaments to bear. The initial salvos were telling and contributed to the loss of Sydney with its full war complement of 645 men. This remains Australia's worst naval disaster. HSK Cormoran was also sunk in the engagement. 317 of her crew of 397 were rescued. For almost 7 decades, the final resting place of Sydney and her crew remained unknown. The fate of Sydney became one of Australia's greatest wartime mysteries, a source of controversy and many conspiracy theories. In 2008, the wreckage of Sydney and Cormoran were found off the coast of Western Australia, about 22 kilometres apart. A commission of inquiry was held by the Department of Defence, and a later expedition in 2015 documented the wreck sites and revealed more about the last moments of the ships. Today, we remember HMAS Sydney and pay our respects to the crew commemorated here on the Roll of Honour. We warmly welcome the family of able seaman Thomas Welsby Clark, whose story will be told shortly. We're honoured to acknowledge Her Excellency Vicky Treadle, British High Commissioner, accompanied by Wing Commander Martin Rendall, Vice Admiral Michael Noonan, Chief of Navy, Mr Greg Moriarty, Secretary of the Department of Defence, Ms Liz Cosson, Secretary of the Department of Veterans Affairs, Lieutenant Colonel Alwar Wagner, Defence Attaché, Embassy of the Federal Republic of Germany, Mr Paul Nothard, Director of the Office of Australian War Graves, Commander Andrew Howe, Commanding Officer, HMAS Sydney 5, and ship's company members of HMAS Sydney, and Mr Matt Anderson, Director of the Australian War Memorial. We're also honoured to welcome other dignitaries who are joining us today to commemorate this significant occasion. As always, we welcome the veterans who have served, those who are still serving, and the families that love and support them. We acknowledge the members of RSL and Services Clubs Association, RSL Victoria and RSL Queensland, who are watching the broadcast of this ceremony from across Australia. During this evening's ceremony, wreaths will be laid at the base of the pool of reflection by family and visitors to the memorial. Australia's Federation Guard is the tri-service ceremonial unit of the Australian Defence Force. They provide a ceremonial presence at civil and military events and during visits to Australia by foreign dignitaries. The Guard will now dismount the catapult party from the tomb of the unknown Australian soldier. If you're able, please stand and join in singing the national anthem. If able, please be seated. The Australian War Memorial was the vision of Charles Bean, Australia's first World War official historian. Bean landed with the Australian troops on Gallipoli and stayed with them at the front through until the end of the war. The idea of this national memorial and museum came to him at Pozières, France, in the depths of the bloody fighting of 1916. Bean's idea was that this would be a place where families and friends could mourn loved ones buried in faraway places. It would also be a place that could help all Australians understand what these men and women had endured and what they had done for us. Bean's vision, to which we remain true, is best expressed as inscribed in the entrance to the memorial's galleries. Here is their spirit, in the heart of the land they loved. And here we guard the record, which they themselves made. Tonight, we will read the story behind just one of those on the Roll of Honour, which lists the names of more than 102,000 men and women who have given their lives for us in war and on operations for more than a century. But first, we present a lament. Flowers of the forest. Wreaths or floral tributes will now be laid at the base of the pool of reflection, in the following order. The family of able seaman Thomas Welsby Clark. Vice Admiral Michael Noonan, Chief of Navy. Mr. Greg Moriarty, Secretary of the Department of Defence. Commander Andrew Howe, Commanding Officer, HMAS Sydney 5. Mr. Jim Quick, President of the HMAS Sydney Association. Mr. David Manolis, National President of the Naval Association of Australia. Mr. John King, President of the Returned and Services League of Australia, ACT branch. Mr. Matt Anderson, Director of the Australian War Memorial. The final wreaths this evening will be laid by visitors to the Australian War Memorial.
Today, we remember and pay tribute to able seaman Thomas Welsby Clark. Thomas Welsby Clark was born in the Brisbane suburb of New Farm, Queensland, on the 28th of January 1920. The third son of James Colin Clark and Marion Clark. His father was a grazier who was the eldest son of James Clark, an orphan who, as the result of hard work and wise business investments in the pearling industry, had risen from abject poverty to become one of the wealthiest men in Queensland. Thomas's mother descended from the Scottish immigrants who had arrived in Victoria in the early 1850s. Thomas was educated at Slade School in Warwick, Queensland, but also spent time working on the family properties and the Brisbane oyster leases. He was an excellent swimmer and a keen yachtsman. Upon leaving school, he became an accountant in Brisbane, and on the 14th of March, 1939, enlisted in the militia as a private in the Queensland Cameron Highlanders. He was discharged from the militia on the 19th of August, 1940, in order to join the Royal Australian Navy. His elder brothers, Arthur and James, served in the Army and Air Force respectively. Clark joined the Royal Australian Naval Reserve on the 23rd of August, 1940, and was posted to the Anti-Submarine Training School, HMAS Rushcutter, in Sydney, where he completed training as a submarine detector. On completion, he served as an ordinary seaman in the anti-submarine training ship, HMAS St. Giles, based in Sydney Harbour. Thomas was promoted to acting able seaman on the 15th of July, 1941, before completing a short period of training at HMAS Cerberus, the RAN's premier training depot in Victoria, during July to August 1941. On completion of that training, he joined the light cruiser HMAS Sydney. In August 1941, at that time, Sydney was conducting patrol and escort work on the Australian station, escorting such famous troop ships as the Queen Mary and the Queen Elizabeth in southern Australian waters throughout early September. In late September 1941, the cruiser began operating off the Western Australian coast, escorting convoys from Fremantle to the Sunda Strait in the Netherlands, East Indies. There, Sydney would hand the convoy over to Allied warships that would then continue on escorting the ships to Singapore. On the 11th of November 1941, Sydney departed Fremantle, escorting the troop ship Zealandia, carrying troops of the Australian 8th Division. On the 17th, Sydney handed the troop ships over to HMS Durban before commencing their return voyage to Fremantle. On the afternoon of the 19th of November 1941, Sydney sighted a merchant ship some 200 kilometres west of Shark Bay, Western Australia, and closed to investigate. Sydney signalled the ship to identify herself, continuing to close with the mysterious vessel as she did so. The merchant ship slated it was the Dutch steamer Straight Malacca, but in fact she was the heavily armoured German merchant raider Commemorate. In disguise, Commemorate had already sunk 10 unsuspecting merchant ships in the Indian Ocean and taken another as a prize. Sydney drew closer, relinquishing her advantage and superior gunnery and range, demanding the ship identify itself with its allotted secret call sign. The captain of the German raider, Theodor Denmers, did not have the response, and with Sydney close on his starboard beam, he ordered immediate hoisting of the German battle ensign and opened fire. In the battle that followed, both ships were mortally damaged. Sydney, torpedoed and ablaze, sunk during the early hours of the 20th of November with the loss of all 645 members on board. The crew of Cormoran abandoned ship before the raider was scuttled. Approximately 3/4 of a crew survived to become prisoners of war. When Sydney failed to return to Fremantle, a major search began, but only a single empty life raft known as a Carly float, on display here at the Australian War Memorial, and an uninflated REN life jacket were found. Several months later, on the 6th of February 1942, another badly damaged Carly float containing the body of a naval rating wearing blue overalls was washed up at Christmas Island in the Indian Ocean. The body was recovered, and with no means of identification, his remains were buried in an unmarked grave in the European cemetery there. In the post-war years, speculation that the body came from HMAS Sydney increased, leading to a number of official inquiries being held that were confirmed that as a suspicion. Efforts to relocate the body with a view to identifying it followed, and in 2006, the remains of the unknown sailor were exhumed by a specialist team from the Australian Defence Force. The remains were carefully examined and biometric data and DNA samples recorded before the sailor was reinterred, with full naval honours in the Commonwealth War Grave Cemetery in Geraldton, Western Australia, the closest war cemetery to where Sydney was lost. In the years since 2006, a committed team of researchers continued working hard to identify the unknown sailor. And in 2021, DNA testing was able to reveal his identity beyond doubt. Today, at a special ceremony held at Australian War Memorial, marking the 80th anniversary of Sydney's sinking, Vice Admiral Michael Noonan, Chief of Navy, announced that it was able seaman Thomas Wellesby Clark, who had finally completed his long voyage home. Being lost at sea with all hands, the crew of Sydney were commemorated on the Plymouth Naval Memorial in Devon, England. Among them was able seaman Thomas Clark, who was 21 years old when he died. He's also listed on the Roll of Honour to my left, among almost 40,000 Australians who died while serving in the Second World War. A photograph of able seaman Thomas Wellesby Clark is displayed today beside the pool of reception. This is but one of the many stories of service and sacrifice told here at the Australian War Memorial. We will now remember able seaman Thomas Wellesby Clark, who gave his life for us, for our freedoms, in the hope of a better world.
If able, please stand for the reading of the ode and the sounding of the last post.
They have no grave, but the cruel sea. No flowers lay at their head. A rusting hulk is their tombstone, a vast on the ocean bed. They shall grow not old, as we that are left grow old. Age shall not weary them, nor the years condemn. At the going down of the sun, and in the morning, we will remember them.
We will remember them.
Lest we forget.
Lest we forget. We leave you this evening with the words of the memorial's founder, Charles Bean. Many a man lying out there at Poziere, or in the low scrub at Gallipoli, with his poor tired senses barely working through the fever of his brain, has thought in his last moments, well, it's over. But in Australia, they will be proud of this. Ladies and gentlemen, girls and boys, that concludes the last post ceremony. We thank you all for visiting the Australian War Memorial and wish you all a very good evening. Thank you.